It started on a Wednesday afternoon, like any other chaotic weekday in our household. Between juggling work calls and helping my 7-year-old with his homework, the last thing I expected was a message that would change everything. The babysitter, 19-year-old Amanda, had texted me, "Coach Taylor asked if I could cover Friday's practice for him. Is it okay if I pick up our son early that day?" I glanced at it and thought nothing of it. Coach Taylor, our kid's soccer coach, was a friendly guy, always organizing extra practices and games. But something nagged at me. I texted back, "Sure." "Did he say why?" Amanda responded quickly. "Just said he had plans with someone. Guess he's been pretty busy lately." Huh. I felt an odd flutter of discomfort. Plans with someone? Wasn't the team's big match this weekend? Shouldn't he be preparing? I brushed it off, though. People had lives outside soccer, and I wasn't going to be that parent who interrogated the coach. Later that evening, as my wife Melanie and I sat down for dinner, I casually brought up Amanda's message. Melanie was slicing her chicken, her perfectly manicured nails glinting under the light. "Coach Taylor's skipping Friday practice," I said between bites. "Something about plans with someone." She paused for a fraction of a second, so brief that if I hadn't been watching her, I'd have missed it. "Oh," she said lightly. "Maybe he has a date or something. He's single, right?" I nodded, but that uneasy feeling crawled back. "I guess. But with the big game on Saturday, it's a weird time to miss practice." Melanie smiled at me, that warm, reassuring smile she always used when she thought I was overthinking. "You know how people are. Maybe it's important." I let it go, but something about the way she quickly changed the subject to her upcoming weekend plans caught me off guard. She mentioned visiting her sister in another town, a trip she had mentioned once before but now seemed oddly urgent. "Have you heard from Claire recently?" she asked, smoothly redirecting the conversation. "Nope," I said, trying to stay casual. "But give her my regards." The rest of the evening went on like normal, or at least what felt like normal on the surface. But underneath, my mind wouldn't let go of Amanda's message or Melanie's brief hesitation. When she went to bed that night, I stayed up, scrolling through old texts, rereading harmless conversations. I checked the calendar to confirm Melanie's trip to her sister's place. Everything checked out. There was nothing, no reason for my stomach to twist in knots. But as I stared at the dark ceiling later that night, listening to the steady rhythm of Melanie's breathing beside me, a voice in my head whispered, "Maybe there's more to this." I had no idea just how right that voice would be. Friday came around, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. I tried everything to distract myself. Emails, client calls, and cleaning out the garage. But it all led me back to that text and Melanie's sudden urgency to leave town. She'd packed that morning in a hurry, tossing in jeans, a few sweaters, and the dress she always wore when she wanted to look nice but not too nice. As I stood in the doorway watching her zip her bag, I casually asked, "What time are you heading out to Claire's?" She didn't look up. "Around noon. I want to beat the traffic." "No rush," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "How long are you staying?" "Just until Sunday night," she replied, tossing her favorite perfume into the bag, an expensive scent I had given her for our anniversary. "You and our son will survive without me, right?" She chuckled and kissed my cheek before heading downstairs. I followed her, helping load her bag into the car. She kissed me goodbye, but something felt off. The kiss wasn't cold, it just felt rehearsed. She waved as she drove off, and I stood in the driveway, watching her car disappear around the corner. Then, I did something I hadn't done before in our entire marriage. I checked her location on the family tracking app, pinged her on the interstate just as she'd said. But a small voice in my head warned me not to put the phone down. Not yet. By noon, Amanda had picked up our son for soccer, and I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone aimlessly. The family tracker showed Melanie's dot still moving steadily. She was heading in the direction of her sister's town. So why did I feel like something was wrong? Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Amanda. "Coach Taylor's car is at the cafe near the field. Looks like he's grabbing coffee before practice." Coach Taylor's car? But he wasn't supposed to be at practice today. He had plans with someone. Remember? Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed to the cafe. My pulse hammered as I drove, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. I'd see him inside alone, sipping coffee, and feel like an idiot. I rehearsed the excuses I'd tell myself. It's nothing. You're just connecting dots that aren't there. But as I pulled into the lot, my stomach dropped. Melanie's car was parked 2 spaces down from Coach Taylor's. I sat frozen, watching her familiar license plate. She could be meeting someone else, right? Maybe she bumped into Coach by coincidence. My breath felt shallow, like I was breathing through a straw. Suddenly, the cafe door opened, and there they were. Melanie walked out, laughing at something Coach Taylor said. She wasn't just laughing. She was leaning into him, playfully shoving his arm the way she used to do with me when we first started dating. He opened her car door for her, his hand resting on the small of her back for just a second longer than necessary. She climbed in, and he shut the door before walking back to his own car. I wanted to get out and confront them right then and there, but something told me not to. I needed more. I couldn't let my emotions blow this up without knowing the full truth. So I followed her. From the cafe, Melanie's car took a turn I wasn't expecting, away from the interstate and toward the downtown area. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of what I'd seen. Was this a random coffee meetup? Were they just friends? Or was it something else? 15 minutes later, she pulled into a small boutique hotel tucked between office buildings. I parked across the street, heart pounding as I watched her get out, suitcase in hand. Coach Taylor wasn't far behind, carrying what looked like an overnight bag. They walked into the lobby together, her arm brushing against his. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My gut was screaming, confirming what my brain wasn't ready to process yet. She's not at her sister's. She's here with him. I sat in the car for nearly 30 minutes, staring at the hotel entrance and willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. When I finally drove away, I wasn't sure where I was going or what my next move would be. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, my hands were trembling. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. You need to think this through, Jack, I told myself. I couldn't storm into that hotel and cause a scene, as much as I wanted to. I needed a plan. The house felt empty when I stepped inside, the quiet hum of the fridge the only sound. My son wouldn't be back for hours, giving me time to think. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the kitchen counter, replaying the image of Melanie and Coach Taylor walking into the hotel. Her suitcase, his overnight bag, the way she had laughed, leaning into him. How long has this been going on? That question gnawed at me, cutting deeper than the betrayal itself. Was this a fling? Or had she been living a double life right under my nose? My mind wandered to every moment I might have missed. The extra time she spent at the gym, the late-night meetings she always chalked up to work, her sudden interest in weekend getaways with friends. The memories came in flashes. The night she came home with her hair damp, claiming she'd stopped at the gym after work. The time she forgot her phone at home, and it buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Can't wait to see you again. The way she had pulled away from me in bed lately, claiming she was too tired. I felt like a fool. I knew I needed evidence, something undeniable. If I confronted her now, she'd twist the story, say it was all innocent. No, I needed proof. Grabbing my laptop, I started searching for anything that could confirm my suspicions. Bank statements, hotel bookings, anything. My hands moved mechanically as I sifted through our joint accounts. That's when I saw it. A charge from the hotel I had just seen them enter. My stomach lurched as I clicked on the transaction details. It was listed under Melanie's name, booked 3 days ago. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes as the weight of it pressed down on me. 3 days ago. That's when she told me she'd be visiting her sister. The sound of my phone buzzing snapped me out of my daze. It was Amanda. Hey, just letting you know practice is over. Everything went great. Coach didn't show up, though. Wonder what he's up to. I stared at her message, my jaw clenching. What he was up to was currently sharing a hotel room with my wife. I typed back a quick response, thanking her, and then stood up. The kitchen felt suffocating. I needed air, space, something to keep me from exploding. I walked out into the backyard, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the grass. That's when an idea hit me. I didn't just need proof. I needed undeniable, in-your-face evidence. Something that wouldn't allow her to gaslight or manipulate me when I confronted her. I pulled out my phone and searched for private investigators in the area. Within minutes, I had a contact. A man named Mark with over 15 years of experience in infidelity cases. He answered on the second ring. Mark speaking. How can I help you? My wife's cheating on me, I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. I need proof. Can you help me? After a brief discussion, we agreed to meet the next morning. Mark would take it from there, photographic evidence, timestamps, anything I could use. He assured me it wouldn't take long. If she's checked into a hotel with him, we'll have what you need by tomorrow night, he said. Good, I replied, hanging up. I paced the backyard, my mind racing. Tomorrow I would have what I needed. But tonight I had to play the part of the clueless husband. I had to sit through dinner with my son, tuck him into bed, and pretend like my world wasn't crumbling around me. When the sun began to set, I headed back inside and started dinner. As I stirred the pasta on the stove, my phone buzzed again. It was Melanie. Made it safely to Claire's. Miss you already. Red heart. I stared at the message, anger and hurt swirling inside me. Miss me? I thought bitterly. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me that didn't know what she was doing. But that version of me was gone. I put my phone down, forcing myself to focus on dinner. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. But tonight I had to stay calm. For now, the storm was brewing beneath the surface. But soon it would hit. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm even had a chance to ring. My mind had been racing all night, flipping between anger, disbelief, and cold, calculated planning. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and out the door, leaving my son still asleep upstairs. I told him I had an early meeting, and I'd be back in time for lunch. It wasn't exactly a lie, I just didn't specify what kind of meeting. I drove to a small coffee shop downtown, where Mark, the private investigator, was already waiting in a booth by the window. He was a middle-aged guy with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. When I slid into the booth, he didn't waste any time. You're sure about this? He asked, setting down his coffee. Once we get the proof, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. I just need you to confirm what I already know. He nodded, pulling out a small notebook. Tell me everything. When did you first get suspicious? I laid it all out for him. The strange texts, the sudden weekend trips, the hotel sighting with Coach Taylor. As I spoke, Mark jotted down notes, occasionally asking for clarification. Did you check her phone? He asked. No, I admitted. I thought about it, but if she's cheating, she's probably smart enough to cover her tracks. That's fine, he said. We'll get what you need. I'll head over to the hotel today, and if they're still there, I'll have photos and timestamps by tonight. Good, I replied, clenching my fists under the table. I want everything. No room for doubt. Mark nodded again. You'll have it, but be ready. Once you see the proof, it's going to hit you harder than you think. Harder than this? I wondered. I was already drowning in it, but I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I thanked him, paid for my coffee, and left the cafe. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions, picked up groceries, played catch with my son in the backyard, and tried to act like everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. By 7 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for Mark's update. Just when I thought I'd lose my mind, the notification came through. Mark, got what you need. Sending photos now. Do you want to meet? Or are you okay receiving everything digitally? My fingers trembled as I typed back. Send them. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with a series of attachments. I hesitated before opening them, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But I had to know. The first photo showed Melanie and Coach Taylor in the hotel lobby, standing close, their bodies angled toward each other like they shared a secret. The second photo showed them entering the elevator together, her hand resting on his arm. The third was taken through a window, showing the two of them sitting at a small table in what looked like the hotel's dining area. He was leaning forward, whispering something to her, and she was laughing. But the fourth photo was the nail in the coffin. It showed them standing in front of their room door, her back pressed against it as he kissed her. I dropped the phone, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The proof was undeniable. My wife wasn't at her sister's. She was here, cheating on me with our son's soccer coach. I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the betrayal settling over me like a suffocating blanket. But after the initial wave of pain, something else took over. Rage. I wasn't going to sit around and wallow. I wasn't going to let her come home, kiss me on the cheek, and pretend like nothing had happened. No, I was going to confront her, and I was going to make sure she couldn't wiggle her way out of this. I grabbed my car keys and drove. The hotel was only a 20-minute drive, but it felt like I got there in seconds. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the glowing hotel sign. My mind replayed the images, each one stoking the fire inside me. I wasn't sure what my plan was, but I knew one thing. I was done pretending. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding as I made my way to the entrance. The lobby was quiet, the soft hum of background music playing as I walked past the front desk. I didn't need to ask for their room number. I already had it, thanks to Mark's photos. As I reached their floor, my footsteps felt heavy, each step echoing down the hallway like a countdown to disaster. When I found their room, I stood there for a moment, my fist hovering just inches from the door. This was it. No more lies. No more pretending. I knocked. The knock echoed louder than I expected, reverberating down the hotel hallway like a gunshot. I stood there, my fist still clenched, breathing heavily as the sound faded. My mind raced with possibilities. Would Melanie answer the door? Would Coach Taylor be standing right behind her, smug and shirtless? I was ready for anything, or so I thought. Footsteps approached, muffled through the thick door. My pulse pounded in my ears as the doorknob turned, and the door creaked open just a few inches. There she was, Melanie. Her eyes widened the second she saw me, her face draining of color like she'd seen a ghost. For a second, neither of us said a word. The awkward silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that hadn't been said. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe, white, plush, and tied loosely around her waist. Her hair was damp, like she'd just stepped out of the shower. "Jack." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" My jaw tightened, and I forced a cold smile. "What am I doing here?" "That's a great question, Melanie. I could ask you the same thing." She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking whether anyone was watching, then quickly stepped into the hallway and shut the door behind her. I can explain," she stammered, her hands trembling as she clutched the robe tighter around herself. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the corridor. "Explain? What exactly are you going to explain, Melanie?" "The fact that you're here in a hotel, with our son's soccer coach instead of at your sister's house like you said." Her eyes darted around nervously, as if searching for an exit. "It's not what you think. Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending this is something innocent. I saw you." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "I have photos of you two together. I know you've been lying to me." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a brief second, I thought I saw guilt, real, genuine guilt. But it wasn't enough to soften the rage boiling inside me. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long, Melanie? Weeks? Months? Longer?" Her lips quivered, but she stayed silent. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. "Answer me," I shouted, my fists clenched at my sides. "Was it all a lie? Every business trip, every late-night meeting, every time you looked me in the eyes and said you loved me?" The door behind her creaked open, and my blood ran cold. Coach Taylor stepped out, his hair damp and tousled, wearing nothing but a pair of sweatpants. His face was a mix of shock and fear, like a kid caught stealing candy. "Jack, man," he said, raising his hands as if surrendering. "Look, this isn't what it seems." I lunged toward him, but Melanie quickly stepped between us, her hands pressed against my chest. "Stop it," she cried. "Please, Jack, don't make this worse. Make this worse," I barked, pushing her hands away. "You think I'm the one making this worse? You destroyed our family, Melanie. You did this." My chest heaved as I glared at Coach Taylor, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. Part of me wanted to tear him apart right then and there, but the other part of me, the part still clinging to reason, knew that wouldn't solve anything. "You're not worth it," I spat, taking a step back. "Neither of you are." Melanie sobbed, tears streaming down her face as she reached for me. "Jack, please. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Don't throw away everything we've built." I laughed again, shaking my head in disbelief. "Fix this? Melanie, you didn't just break our marriage, you shattered it. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and now you want to pretend like it's something we can patch up over a cup of coffee." She sobbed harder, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the laughter I saw on her face as she walked into this hotel with another man. The pity evaporated, replaced by a cold determination. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the folder where I'd saved the photos Mark had sent me. I held it up to her, forcing her to look. "This is what you've done," I said, my voice eerily calm. "This is who you are now. I hope it was worth it, Melanie. I really do." Her sobs turned into choking gasps, and Coach Taylor stood awkwardly behind her, shifting from foot to foot like he wanted to disappear. "I'll be filing for divorce," I said, turning on my heel and walking away. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I didn't look back. As I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing like a countdown, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, but also something else. Relief, because for the first time in weeks, I finally knew the truth. And that truth would set me free. I didn't drive straight home after leaving the hotel. Couldn't. My hands were still shaking, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I pulled into a random parking lot, killed the engine, and sat there staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, my Melanie, in a hotel with another man. The images flashed through my mind, each one stabbing me like a knife. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I wasn't ready to go home and pretend like everything was fine. I wasn't ready to face my son, look into his innocent eyes, and lie to him the way his mother had lied to me. So instead, I drove to the one place that had always brought me comfort. The park where Melanie and I had shared our first date. Funny how life works. The same park where we once laughed and fed ducks was now my refuge from the wreckage of our marriage. I parked near the same bench we'd sat on all those years ago and buried my face in my hands. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. It wasn't the kind of cry you see in movies, the quiet single tear sliding down the cheek. No, this was raw, gut-wrenching sobbing that left me gasping for air. My shoulders shook as the weight of everything crashed down on me. The betrayal, the lies, the fact that the woman I had built my life around had torn it apart so easily. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but eventually, the tears stopped. My breathing slowed, and a strange calm washed over me. Not peace exactly, more like the numbness that comes after you've hit rock bottom. There was no further to fall. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. The notifications on my screen blurred for a moment as I blinked away the last of my tears. There was a missed call from Melanie, followed by a string of text messages. "Melanie, please come back. We need to talk." "Melanie, I'm sorry, Jack. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Melanie, I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. Please." I scrolled past her messages, my heart hardening with each word. She didn't deserve a response. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I exited the messages and opened another app, the contact list. Scrolling down, I found the name I needed, Jonathan Parker, divorce attorney. He was an old college friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but I remembered he specialized in high-stakes divorces, the kind where one partner had everything to lose. I tapped the number and waited as the phone rang. Jonathan Parker, a familiar voice answered. Jonathan, it's Jack Meyer, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need your help. It's about my wife. She's been cheating on me, and I'm ready to file for divorce. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a sigh. Jack, I'm really sorry to hear that. Are you sure about this? I have proof, I said, my jaw tightening. Photos, timestamps, everything. There's no coming back from this. Okay, he said, his tone shifting into professional mode. We'll get started right away. I'll email you a list of documents you'll need to gather. Bank statements, property deeds, joint accounts, anything that ties the two of you together. And Jack, try to stay calm. The next few weeks are going to be rough. I thanked him and hung up, a sense of grim determination settling over me. Melanie wanted to talk, to explain, to patch things up, but there was no patching this. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. As I sat there, staring at the rippling surface of the pond, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Amanda, our babysitter. Amanda, just checking in. Your son is back from practice, safe and sound. Let me know if you need me to stay later. I hesitated before responding. No thanks. I'll be home soon. After hitting send, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and leaned back against the headrest. I had to face him eventually, my son. I had to find a way to explain why his world was about to be turned upside down. But how do you tell a child that their mother isn't who they thought she was? How do you shield them from the pain when you can barely handle it yourself? I closed my eyes, thinking back to the day he was born. Melanie had been so happy, holding him in her arms, promising we'd give him the perfect family. What a lie that had turned out to be. The sun was setting when I finally pulled out of the park and headed home. As I turned onto our street, the house came into view, our house. The place where we'd celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, and lazy Sunday afternoons. The place where I thought we were building a future together. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, gathering my strength. Then, with one last deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked inside. My son ran up to me, grinning as he hugged my legs. Dad, I scored 2 goals at practice today. I forced a smile, ruffling his hair. That's awesome, buddy. I'm proud of you. He beamed, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. And for his sake, I vowed to keep it that way for as long as I could. But deep down, I knew the storm was only just beginning. Dinner that night felt like a ticking time bomb. My son chattered away about his day, soccer practice, his friends, the new video game he wanted for his birthday. I nodded and smiled, doing my best to be present, but my mind was elsewhere. I could hear every tick of the clock on the wall, each second dragging me closer to the confrontation that I knew was coming. The second I tucked him into bed, I was back downstairs, phone in hand, staring at Melanie's messages. She texted me at least a dozen more times, but I didn't read them. What was there to say that I didn't already know? She was scrambling, trying to get ahead of the inevitable. But it was too late. I wasn't interested in excuses. I sat on the couch, fingers drumming against my thigh as I debated what to do next. Should I call her? Ignore her? Drive back to the hotel and give them both a piece of my mind? A million scenarios played out in my head, each one more destructive than the last. Just as I was about to turn off my phone and pour myself a drink, the doorbell rang. I froze. No, she wouldn't. Would she? Slowly, I stood and made my way to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw her. Melanie, standing on the porch with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she were bracing against a storm. Her eyes were red and puffy, her makeup smudged. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. Jack, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, can I come in? For a moment, I considered slamming the door in her face. But that wouldn't solve anything. I stepped aside, letting her in. She stood awkwardly in the entryway, glancing around as if she were seeing the house for the first time. It felt surreal, watching her in the home we'd built together, knowing she had just come from another man's bed. "Why are you here, Melanie?" I asked, my voice cold. "Shouldn't you be back at the hotel with Coach Taylor?" Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I never meant to hurt you." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "Don't give me that. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think you'd get caught." She wiped her eyes, mascara smearing across her cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was confused, Jack. I've been unhappy, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it." I laughed bitterly. "Unhappy? So instead of talking to me, you decided to screw around with our kid's soccer coach? Great solution." Her sobs grew louder, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It wasn't serious," she mumbled between sobs. "It didn't mean anything." I felt something inside me snap. "Didn't mean anything? Melanie, you lied to me. You lied to our son. You destroyed our marriage. And now you want to downplay it like it was just some meaningless fling." She lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. "I still love you, Jack. I never stopped loving you." I clenched my jaw, the weight of her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You don't get to say that. Not after what you've done." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you even understand what you've done to me? To us?" "I do," she whispered. "And I'll do anything to fix it. Please, Jack, don't give up on us." I stared at her, my heart pounding as memories of our life together flooded my mind. The day we bought this house, the nights we stayed up late planning our future, the birth of our son. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the version of her I thought I knew. But that version was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "Fixing this isn't an option," I said finally. "You broke something that can't be repaired." Her sobs turned into desperate gasps, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Jack, please." "No," I said firmly. "I've already spoken to a divorce attorney. I'm done." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Melanie stared at me, her face crumpling as the reality of what I was saying sank in. "Jack, please," she whimpered. "Think about our son. Think about what this will do to him." I felt a fresh wave of anger surge through me. "Don't you dare use him as a shield. You didn't think about him when you were sneaking around behind my back. You don't get to play the concerned mother now." She sobbed harder, clutching at the couch cushions like they were a lifeline. "Where am I supposed to go?" I stared down at her, feeling a strange mix of pity and disgust. "That's not my problem. Go back to the hotel, stay with a friend, I don't care. But you can't stay here." She nodded weakly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket. "I'll pack some things and go." I watched as she climbed the stairs, her footsteps slow and heavy. The woman who came down 20 minutes later, carrying a hastily packed suitcase, wasn't the same woman I had married. Or maybe she was, and I had just never seen her for who she truly was. At the front door, she hesitated. "I'm sorry, Jack. I mean it." I didn't respond. Couldn't. She stepped outside, and I closed the door behind her, locking it. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in days, it felt like I could breathe again. I stood there for a moment, leaning against the door, before heading to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, downed it in one gulp, and sat at the dining table, staring at the empty seat where Melanie used to sit. The house felt colder, emptier, but it didn't matter. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wouldn't be defined by her betrayal. The morning after Melanie left, the house felt eerily quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. The smell of breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, filled the room, but it tasted like cardboard. Nothing seemed real. My son came downstairs, still groggy, rubbing his eyes. He plopped into his usual seat, yawning. "Where's Mom?" I froze for a second, the fork halfway to my mouth. I knew this moment was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. I set down the fork and forced a smile. "Mom had to go on a trip, buddy. She'll be staying somewhere else for a while." He frowned, poking at his eggs with his fork. "Why? Is she mad at you?" The innocence of his question hit me hard, like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to tell him the truth, that his mother had shattered our family with her betrayal, but he was just a kid. He didn't deserve to carry that weight. "No, she's not mad," I said softly. "Sometimes grown-ups just need space to figure things out." "Is she coming back?" he asked, his voice small. I hesitated, my chest tightening. "I don't know, buddy, but no matter what happens, you and I are going to be okay. I promise." He nodded slowly, though I could see the confusion in his eyes. My heart broke a little more, but I had to stay strong for him. After breakfast, I sent him off to play with his friends and sat at the table, staring at my phone. Melanie hadn't tried to call or text since last night, which was a small relief. I didn't have the energy to deal with her today. Instead, I opened the email from Jonathan Parker, my divorce attorney. He had already sent over the paperwork I needed to fill out, everything from asset division to custody arrangements. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered the implications. Melanie was the love of my life, the woman I had vowed to grow old with. But now, she was just someone I had to legally separate from, someone I had to protect myself and my son from. I filled out the forms with mechanical precision, listing every joint account, property, and debt. When I reached the section about custody, I paused. Shared custody was the default option, but the thought of my son being shuffled between two homes made my stomach churn. I wanted full custody. I wanted to keep him safe from the chaos Melanie had brought into our lives. But would that be fair? Would it be possible? My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Amanda, our babysitter. "Amanda, hey, just checking in. Do you need me to come by and help with anything today?" For a moment, I considered saying no. I wanted to be alone, to wallow in the wreckage of my life. But then I realized that having someone else around might actually help. "Yeah, that would be great. Can you come over around noon?" "Amanda, on my way." I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The memories came flooding back again. The way Melanie had laughed with Coach Taylor. The way she'd clutched the hotel robe around herself when she saw me. The way she'd begged for forgiveness through tears. I shook my head, forcing the images away. I couldn't let them consume me. I had a son to raise, a life to rebuild. When Amanda arrived, she brought her usual warmth and energy, filling the house with a sense of normalcy I hadn't realized I needed. We talked while she helped clean up the kitchen, and for the first time in days I found myself smiling. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently, leaning against the counter. I shrugged. "I don't know. Some moments I feel okay. Other moments I feel like I'm drowning." She nodded sympathetically. "That's normal. You've been through a lot, Jack. But you're doing the right thing by focusing on your son. He's lucky to have you." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I had to look away to keep the tears from spilling over. I wasn't used to being on the receiving end of kindness. Not like this. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We spent the afternoon playing board games with my son, who laughed so hard during a round of charades that he fell off the couch. For a few hours, I forgot about the mess Melanie had left behind. I forgot about the divorce papers sitting on my laptop, waiting to be finalized. But as evening approached and Amanda packed up to leave, reality came crashing back down. "Let me know if you need anything, okay?" she said at the door. "Even if it's just someone to talk to." I nodded, grateful. "I will. Thanks again." As I closed the door behind her, the silence returned, but this time, it didn't feel as suffocating. I had survived the day. Upstairs, my son was already asleep, his favorite stuffed animal tucked under his arm. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, and promised myself that I would do everything I could to protect him from the storm his mother had created. Back downstairs, I poured myself another glass of whiskey and sat at the dining table, staring at the divorce papers. I wasn't ready to sign them yet, but I knew I would. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because this wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about taking back control of my life. And I was ready for that. I woke up the next morning with a clearer head than I'd had in days. The weight of what was coming was still there, but it didn't crush me the way it had before. Today, I had a sense of purpose, like I was finally moving forward instead of drowning in the past. Melanie hadn't reached out again. No calls. No texts. No sudden appearances at the front door. And I was fine with that. The silence was a gift, giving me the space I needed to prepare for what came next. After dropping my son off at school, I met with Jonathan Parker at his office. He was already waiting for me in a small conference room, a folder of papers spread across the polished wooden table. His tailored suit and calm demeanor were reassuring, like he'd seen worse situations than mine and knew exactly how to handle them. "Jack," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've reviewed the paperwork you sent over. I think we have a strong case, especially considering the evidence you have of the affair." I nodded, trying not to flinch at the word affair. Hearing it spoken out loud made it feel more real, like a wound being poked. "What are my options?" I asked, leaning forward. "Well," Jonathan said, flipping through the papers, "you can file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, which could work in your favor when it comes to asset division. You mentioned wanting full custody of your son. That's going to be trickier." "Why?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because courts typically favor joint custody unless there's proof that one parent is unfit," he explained. "Right now, Melanie's affair doesn't automatically make her an unfit mother in the eyes of the court. But if she's been neglecting your son or exposing him to inappropriate situations, we could use that." I clenched my fists under the table. The thought of sharing custody with Melanie made my blood boil, but I had to be realistic. "What about supervised visits?" Jonathan hesitated. "We'd need solid evidence that she's a danger to your son. Without that, it might be hard to convince a judge." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "Okay, let's focus on what we can control." We spent the next hour going over the details, dividing assets, setting up a custody arrangement that would protect my son as much as possible, and outlining a strategy for how we'd approach the settlement. By the time we were done, I felt like I'd been through a war, but at least I had a plan. As I left Jonathan's office, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "Unknown Jack, it's me. We need to talk." Me, like I wouldn't know who it was. I debated ignoring her, but something told me this conversation was inevitable. Better to get it over with now than to let it hang over my head. "Me, where?" "Melanie. The park by the old bridge. In an hour." I stared at the screen for a moment before shoving the phone back into my pocket. Fine. If she wanted to talk, I'd let her talk. But she wasn't going to get the closure she was probably hoping for. The park was quiet when I arrived, the late morning sun filtering through the trees and casting dappled shadows on the ground. I parked my car and walked toward the bridge, the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes breaking the silence. She was already there, sitting on a bench with her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of what she'd done had physically shrunk her. When she saw me, she stood up, her eyes already glistening with tears. "Jack." I didn't respond. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to say whatever she had rehearsed on the way over. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I know you hate me right now, and I don't blame you. But please, just listen to me." "I'm listening," I said, my voice flat. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't plan it. I was just lost." I laughed bitterly. "Lost? That's your excuse? You got lost in another man's bed." Her face crumpled, and she sobbed into her hands. But I didn't move to comfort her. Couldn't. I was too far past that. "I don't know how I let it get this far," she said between sobs. "I felt like we were drifting apart, and instead of talking to you, I made the worst mistake of my life. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you to think about our son. He needs both of us." You should have thought about him, I snapped, before you decided to blow up our lives. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know I messed up, but I want to make this right. Please, Jack, don't shut me out completely. I took a step closer, my voice low but firm. I'm not shutting you out, Melanie. I'm protecting myself. I'm protecting our son. You don't get to pretend this can be fixed. She sobbed harder, collapsing back onto the bench. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old me. The one who would have knelt beside her, held her, told her everything was going to be okay. But that version of me was gone. I've already filed the divorce papers, I said, the words falling like a hammer. You'll get them soon. I suggest you get a lawyer. Her sobs quieted, and she looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. Is this really it? It is, I said, my voice steady. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked away, the sound of her crying fading behind me. With each step, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. I had done it. I had faced her, told her the truth, and walked away. As I drove home, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The storm wasn't over yet, but I was finally in control. And that was a victory I could live with. The day the divorce papers were officially served, I stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window at my son playing in the backyard. The morning sun warmed the grass as he kicked a soccer ball against the fence, oblivious to the fact that everything around him was changing. Part of me wanted to shield him from the truth forever, to protect his innocence and let him believe that life was simple and perfect. But that wasn't possible. Sooner or later he would know. Maybe not the messy details, but he'd understand that his parents had reached a point of no return. The sound of the doorbell snapped me out of my thoughts. I set down the coffee mug, wiped my hands on a towel, and made my way to the front door. It wasn't Melanie this time. It was Amanda, holding a small container of homemade cookies and smiling softly. Thought you might need a distraction, she said, lifting the container. I chuckled, stepping aside to let her in. You read my mind. We sat in the living room, munching on cookies as the sunlight filtered through the curtains. Amanda had become more than just a babysitter over the past few weeks. She had become a friend, someone I could lean on when things felt too heavy. How's everything going? She asked, brushing a crumb off her jeans. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Better, I guess. The papers were served this morning. I'm officially on the path to being single again. She nodded, her expression sympathetic. How do you feel about that? I thought about it for a moment. Relieved. Sad. Angry. But mostly relieved. I laughed lightly. Is it weird that I feel like I can finally breathe again? Not weird at all, she said, her eyes kind. You've been carrying this weight for a long time. Letting go is supposed to feel like this. I nodded, leaning back against the couch. I didn't think I'd ever get to this point. I thought losing Melanie would destroy me. But it didn't, Amanda said firmly. You survived it. And your son is going to be okay too, because he has you. The words settled in my chest, soothing some of the lingering doubt that had been eating away at me. I told him the truth yesterday, I said softly, staring down at the cookie in my hand. Well, as much of the truth as he needed. I said Mom and Dad aren't going to live together anymore, but we both still love him, and that'll never change. How did he take it? He cried. I admitted, my throat tightening. But then he hugged me and said he understood. I don't know if he really does, but I think he trusts that I'll take care of him. Amanda placed a comforting hand on my arm. He's a smart kid. He's going to be okay, Jack. And so are you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, I think I will be. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. Outside, my son laughed as he kicked the ball into the makeshift goal we had set up weeks ago. His laughter was the reminder I needed, that life goes on, even when it feels like the world has fallen apart. When Amanda left, I walked back into the backyard, joining my son in his game of soccer. We ran around the yard, laughing and kicking the ball back and forth, the weight of the past few weeks momentarily forgotten. Later that evening, after I had tucked him into bed, I sat at the dining room table with the divorce papers spread out in front of me. The pen in my hand felt heavy, like it was carrying the weight of the past 10 years. I stared at the blank line at the bottom of the page, the space where my signature would officially end my marriage. I thought about all the memories, both good and bad. The day we bought this house, the nights we stayed up late talking about our dreams, the betrayal that had shattered everything. And then I thought about the future, a future where I could rebuild my life, a future where my son would grow up knowing that he had a father who loved him fiercely, who would never let him down. With a steady hand, I signed my name. It wasn't the end I had envisioned when I said my vows to Melanie all those years ago, but it was the ending I needed. I gathered the papers, placed them in the envelope Jonathan had given me, and set it by the door. Tomorrow I would mail them and close this chapter of my life for good. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, a sense of calm settled over me. The storm had passed, and though the damage was still visible, I knew I could rebuild. In bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't consumed by anger or sadness. I felt free. And that's when I realized something important. Endings aren't always a tragedy. Sometimes, they're the beginning of something better. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out.